So good morning, welcome to this e-memoir session in association with Wootton, the Further Education Tutorial Network. This morning we're looking at the challenges of COVID-19 for tutorial staff and students. Session is going to be led by Dr. Sally Wootton and Beej Kaczmarczyk. We'd like to keep the session as interactive as possible, so feel free to use a question or chat facility at any point throughout the duration of this webinar. You don't have to wait until the end. You can ask questions at any point throughout the duration. If you're watching this on a video recording and you have any questions or thoughts, then you can get in touch with Beej or Sally and the contact details will be available at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to mute my microphone and hand over to Beej for an introduction. Keep the questions coming all. Thank you.
Thanks very much then, Marek, and good morning, everyone. Good morning. I hope you're all well. We have well over 100 registrations, and I can just see that 53 people are already on today's webinar. As Marek says, this morning's webinar will be led by Sally Wootton, who's founding director of the Further Education Tutorial Network. The theme, Challenges of COVID-19 for Tutorial Staff and Students, which I think is a very apt and appropriate thing for us to be looking at, given that many of us have returned in part, and obviously there's expectation that all kinds of colleges and other providers will be expecting to return to a much fuller complement of students sometime after September. So I'm going to be looking after the questions and the chat. So as Marek says, we're encouraging you to ask questions, pose comments, make any suggestions as we go along. And this will allow Sally to focus on the content of today. So thanks very much. Now over to Sally.
Thanks, Beej. Morning, everybody. Just to start off, a bit of background around today's webinar. I've been having some discussions with the members of the Further Education Tutorial Network. We've had weekly online meetings since March, since the lockdown. And it's been very apparent that it's had quite significant effects on both tutors and students. So I thought it would be good just to capture all of these thoughts and to get a sense of how things are out in the sector at the moment. So these are the kind of areas of discussion, some of which we'll be looking at during this next hour. Particularly sharing tutors' concerns, students' concerns. We'll be looking at preparing for going back to our colleges and training organisations and see what sort of preparations we're putting in place with the current lack of guidance. I think everybody's still very concerned about that. So as Marek said, please questions as we're going along will be great. And here we go. So first of all, a little look at what students are saying. The general sense that we get is that there's a real mixed picture. Some students are quite enjoying the space and the chance to work independently, to work the hours that they want to work on their studies. So there's different patterns emerging. Some are kind of getting up late and they're working through into the evening and they're quite enjoying that, excuse me. They are very worried about the picture in terms of their coursework, how they're going to complete their work. Some have been concerned that they're not getting the contact with teachers that they need. And in some cases, colleges are not running lessons as they would within the timetable. So we've got patterns where some colleges are actually running the timetable and those lessons are being delivered online and students can tap into that. In other instances, they're relying on sort of individual catch-ups, which doesn't seem to be working quite as well. In terms of the tutoring support, I think the main thing is the difficulties for students where there is no technology available or limited technology available. And so we're having to do a lot of telephone conversations, trying to catch up with students, which can be difficult. One of the things that they are really enjoying is that one-to-one. for some reason, we seem to be getting more engagement in one-to-one, particularly for those students that wouldn't normally engage in college. So this sense of a distance is obviously having some impact, and this feeling that they can talk more freely. Okay, one of the other things that they are particularly worried about is what it's going to look like when they come back, and worries over reduced job opportunities and reduced opportunities for work placement. So we've got all these anxieties are starting to come through. They're asking questions from tutors, and unfortunately not a lot of tutors know the answers because we're not in that place yet. So we've got these anxieties on both sides, really. Students are worried about wanting to know what's happening. Teachers are anxious and tutors are anxious because they don't have the answers to give.
There's a lot of concern, Sally, isn't there, from students on practical courses, you know, hairdressing, plumbing, catering.
Absolutely.
That although they're getting the inputs on underpinning knowledge, it's the practical skills that they're not being able to practice, demonstrate, or to show how much they actually know.
Well, that's it, and they're really anxious about how are they going to be assessed on these for their courses. So there's so much riding on the fact that they've not had that contact, that physical contact within colleges and training organisations to both practice and demonstrate these skills. And as a result of that, a lot of students are saying that they would actually like to defer for a year, which I'm not sure what the implications would be for funding, for example, but a lot of students feel that they've missed that much. They would just like to start the year again.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. That's a question I think we've been posing as providers to the ESFA in England to say, well, you know, what provision are we going to make? Because normally if the student is on a 2-year program, we assume 2 years funding, but in some cases we might be looking at 2.5, 3 years. Yeah. So I think that is a concern.
Yeah.
What I've picked up, Sally, if you want to flag up a few things, we've been asking apprentices what they're concerned about, because obviously they're learning in the workplace. And these are just some of the things that they've come up with. Obviously, the added feature of apprentices is they're at work. They're learners who are at work. So redundancy, reduced hours, unpaid leave, being furloughed. Some of our apprentices have been ill. They've actually had COVID-19, or they've been caring for others that have had COVID-19. And what we've also got is that many of the apprentices find it's very difficult to work from home when they've also got, you know, family responsibilities, young children or whatever. We found 1 or 2 apprentices, for example, who've been transferred to a new role. So some apprentices at Mercedes who were obviously training in motor vehicle have now been moved over to the production of PPE, which is a completely different occupational area, and they're worried about about what that's doing to their original apprenticeship. Quite a lot, as you said, Sally, of our apprentices have not had access to online facilities. It's made it more difficult. And then, of course, they've also had the problem about the availability of workplace tutors, because they rely so much on the tutor seeing them in the workplace, having that time to meet with them when it's off-the-job training. For example, off-the-job training has been very difficult for apprentices in the health and social care, logistics and retail sector, because they're up to hours. In fact, most of them are working overtime, so they haven't got time for off-the-job training. A lot have not been able to complete the gateway through which they need to go before they can go on to endpoint assessment. And then well-catalogued problems about the endpoint assessment either being delayed, not being able to do the practical work. Again, some of the apprentices have had concerns about, well, in the endpoint assessment, I would have been able to demonstrate all the skills I've learned in a holistic way. This is now being replaced either by a witness testimony or a written test, and it's not the same. So it's very similar to the concerns that other students on full-time study programs have expressed, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is this real sense that, you know, that there's been so much time lost and so little access for these skills developments that a fresh start would I think people would sigh a breath of relief if that was to be allowed. Whether or not, you know, we see that within the funding, nobody knows, and I think this is part of people's anxieties as well.
And tutors have got the added problem that with the apprentices have been made redundant, we are expected within 12 weeks to find them a new job. But where? You know, where are the new opportunities? So thanks very much for that then. Thank you. A couple of questions there that relate to that, and I've just posed them just now. Thank you for that. Thank you. Okay,
thanks. So if we look at how tutors are currently helping students, as I said previously, we've got a lot of emailing and contacting by phone. One of the big difficulties is getting access to those students that may be at risk, who don't have access to internet, who may not be able to talk freely in their environment that they're in, and so this is causing some concern. There isn't a great deal that people can do other than what they're doing, because obviously they can't do home visits or anything like that. So people are trying to be mindful. In a lot of cases, they're using sort of online safeguarding things such as eSafe to try and track and monitor what students are doing to some extent. But again, if they don't have the technology, then you know, it's a useless exercise for those particular students. They're trying to be appreciative of the circumstances and work flexibly. They're trying to use positive language when talking to students to kind of steer them away from this sense that, you know, lockdown is a bad thing, and they're finding it difficult and they're missing their friends, and trying to be more positive and get them to have that more positive mindset. Also offering students an opportunity to engage with each other is really important, and you know, sort of getting that support from the peers can see them through those difficult times. Talking about their anxieties, you know, not avoiding the issue, because for a lot of people they will be impacted by this, and they do need to be able to have that opportunity to talk about it, you know, to move beyond it, to then be able to concentrate on other things such as their studies, and letting students know what type of support is currently available, trying to get them in touch with, for example, mental health and wellbeing teams within the organisation for those students that are particularly struggling. So these are some of the things that tutors are currently trying to do.
Sally, are you aware of how effective FETN members feel that their provision for vulnerable learners has been? Because obviously they've been going into college or into the training centre in many cases, and obviously there's safeguarding issues associated with those students anyway. But have you got a sense of how, what's been the take-up, and how effective do people feel that support has been for those vulnerable young learners?
I think for those learners that are actually going into college, there is a sense that it works well for them, and it you know, it gives them that respite, and they're able to support them and to monitor them, and to, you know, monitor their well-being as well as their progress. The concern is very much for those students that they feel out of touch with, and a lot of anxieties around the ones that are not engaging, and the limitations that we have on being able to engage with those learners tends to be the biggest worry.
There's an additional question here, Sally. Do we have any idea of how many learners who initially engaged might have just tailed off? In other words, they might have been there for the first 3 or 4 weeks, really committed, but seem to have lost that energy or commitment.
No, and that's a really good question. So maybe colleagues would like to give some feedback on what their sense of it is. It's not something that's actually come up in discussions. From what I can gather, those that have engaged have continued to engage, but you know, I couldn't state that as a fact. So that would be really interesting feedback.
I think Emily's added a good point here. Thanks, Emily. Part of the problem for us is actually getting the students to college as we recruit from such a wide area. So the learning support team, the wellbeing team and course managers have done a great job in keeping in touch. I think that's the added problem, how difficult it is if you've got a very dispersed population.
Yes, yes, definitely. Thanks for that, Emily. Okay, so if we just pick up on some aspects that tutors are talking about, the things that they're saying at the moment. They're continuing with the pastoral support, but we've already talked about the anxieties around that, particularly the ones that we can't get in touch with. They are delivering online wellbeing sessions. You'll recognise some of these from the things that you're doing yourselves, no doubt. The worries about students settling back into college life, you know, we don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know what our classrooms are going to look like. We need to re-establish what expectations and classroom behaviours might be. And certainly one of the strongest things that's been coming out of these conversations over the last few months has been the essential role of one-to-one and giving students time to have conversations, to talk about their experiences, and then to focus on how they move forward from that. Now, you know, it could be argued that some of these conversations can be had in a group setting, such as a group tutorial, but there is also that thing about some people will need the space to have a one-to-one and to look at where they're going next. And in amongst that conversation is, are their plans the same? I think we talk about this a little bit later on, but for some students, they might have a very different perspective to where they're going, what they want, what their studies mean to them after this experience than they had prior to it. So all of this needs to be discussed as well.
And Nicholas, thank you. You raised another issue, is that, okay, we're very often thinking about the students that were already in the college or in the training provider, but obviously the big concern is the 800,000 school leavers, yes, many of whom who have had no transition. So they've had no, you know, if you want, they haven't had the exams, they've not had the formal leaving, they've not had the sort of the gala dinner or whatever. Yes. So their transition is going to be, I think, an exceptionally, and I agree with Nicholas, that has got to be very carefully managed. Yes,
yes. I think later on in the slides there are a couple of ideas that people are starting to put in place for that. So you know, we'll come back to that, but please remind me if I don't.
And I think there's also been an issue for some of our existing students. Deborah, you've raised the point, which I've come across, I'm sure Sally has, that some of the level 3 learners who are in the second year stopped engaging as soon as the awarding body announced the final major project wouldn't count towards their grade. Yes. So it's very difficult, because very often that was the thing that really, in a holistic way, got them to shine, that made the difference, that often got them the distinction.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and what does that do for motivation? Absolutely.
But I think one of the comments that's coming through here is that because there's such a diverse range of needs that we're talking about today, there's no one solution fits all. We're going to have a real range of very different solutions depending on the nature of your learners, their backgrounds, their circumstances, and I think that's going to make it more difficult to manage as well.
Absolutely, and I mean, this is something that I've proposed for years anyways, that, you know, we should be looking at a personalized approach, and one fits all doesn't work in any educational context. So we need to be looking at how we're working, and I suppose sort of moving on to that, when tutors are having these discussions, they've been trying to to see, are there any positives that can come out of this current situation? On this whole thing about, you know, sort of reconsidering what should tutorial look like, what does good teaching and learning look like? We've got a lot of students saying they quite enjoy this online and working at a distance, and you know, there are proposals that some want to continue, or we should move more towards a blended learning model. So you know, looking at the situation and trying to draw these positives, maybe we can say, what does good look like now? Is it different? Can we reimagine it? So something else that people are saying is that tutors and teachers are working closely together to make sure that students are served well. And I think that's something that, you know, it was an area of improvement. So it's good to see that's happening. We could also look at the whole situation around the resourcing of one-to-one reviews. Students have really valued this personal support over these last few months, and the fact that is coming through quite strongly. I think we need to raise a flag on this one and say, let's just have a look at the resourcing. Let's have a look at the quality of what our one-to-ones are, and see what we can do to improve this moving forward. Because if it is an essential element, and it's going to continue to be an essential element after all of this has settled down. You know, it always was in the past. You know, the feedback from practitioners and managers of this area of provision have always said that it's an essential part of it. But maybe now we can make a better case for it than we have in the past. So that's something that we can look at.
Sally, before you go on, before you move on, a couple of points there just coming through. I thought one's a useful point is that, as you said, it's a good time to look at what good teaching and learning is, and how some learners have really enjoyed the online learning. But the comment that we've also got several times now is, well, for some of the more able students who have really enjoyed and developed well because of the face-to-face, they haven't liked being, you know, online or distance. Yeah. They've benefited. So again, it's affecting different students in different ways. And I think the point you've made there is that we have to train young people and adults on how to learn online. It's it's a different pedagogy. So I think you've raised another very important issue. Gordon's also raised the issue. Isn't it time now that we all realise that we've got a pastoral role, not just the tutors? You know, so it's part of CPD. How
That's
can all
music to my ears?
That's come from Gordon. So, you know, in a pastoral sense, all of us, all tutors, in a pastoral sense. So it's trainers, teachers, lecturers, etc. But I think it's interesting. Claire's commented also that it's so different, because we found that, for example, some of our older learners in beauty really enjoy the blended learning, because they are, in effect, managing their own learning around their household, around their, you know, parental duties, etc. And they found that that's better as long as they can access the materials. If the materials are only available as, well, we're going to video the lecture at 11 o'clock. They say, well, 11 o'clock is when I was actually getting one of the youngsters down, and then, you know, I was supposed to do a wee bit of online shopping. Can I not just have it available so I can watch it at, you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning, when eventually everything's died down or quieter? So I think there's different versions of online learning. Yes. And we've got to look at the effectiveness of those different. There isn't one model of blended learning.
Yes, and I think, and like you say, it's also acknowledging that it may not be for everyone. And so what we have to do is we have to build far more flexibility into the way we approach this going forward. Excuse me.
Sorry, I got you before the last point there, Sally, on that slide. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. No worries. So concerns that tutors are sharing then, sort of looking at the things that they're worried about moving forward. Excuse me. How to maintain and provide support for students who don't have access to technology. This, like I said before, has been a real concern. How best to support left behind students and to help them to catch up with their studies and plan for their progression. So we've got disadvantaged students who, because they've not been able to engage maybe in the technology, for example, how do we help them to catch up? What are we doing now to make sure that they are coping and that they are actually managing to do some studies? So again, it's, you know, what is this going to look like when we go back? Because for those students, they're not going to be able to catch up in a couple of weeks' time, and it comes back to this issue of, you know, is it fairer and better to resit that year again, and so that everybody then can go through that process as a normal year, and just say, you know, this has been a year that's been, it can be about our learning about our personal skills, our resilience, and we can use this situation that we've been through or still going through and look at that side of development, and then get back to those academic and vocational studies afresh, starting again next year. You know, that would, for me, would be the ideal, listening to what students and tutors are saying.
Sally, that's raised a couple of questions already. One of them is, yes, but what about HE? You know, they would have to think about, that's delaying perhaps progression. So we'd have to have a synchronization there. The other issue is, and it's just a question that one person's posed, how many of the people listening in have used their discretionary learner support to provide things like IT equipment, laptops, etc., for the students that don't have access to the IT technology?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
And that, by the way, is allowed. I mean, obviously, if you look at the way that discretionary learner support works, you've got different flexibilities within it. Obviously, you base it on need, and obviously that takes account of person's personal circumstances. Emily's just raising, we're about to hit the end of term at college, and some colleges have already finished. So what we've got is these different points of contact that might possibly occur when some students have already finished, others are still working, what do you call it, and having to attend. So that obviously, you know, we've got, how do we keep in touch with these learners who are different stages of leaving the institution?
Yeah.
Deborah, by the way, you have provided lots of tablets and laptops. Thank you. And Donna, laptops and dongles, so that's good. So we've had Lynn, great, Karen, Debbie, Helen, you've loaned them out, Erica. So we've had a really good response on that question about using learner support funds to support those learners that don't have access to IT. It's a brilliant response from the sector again. Thank you, Sophie.
Fabulous.
But what about the people that you know, are going to feel really anxious about coming back, because is it safe?
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things that that keeps coming up. You know, the anxieties of individuals, or some people might have underlying health problems that they're really scared, you know, about what the future's going to hold. There's all this talk now about lifting lockdown and moving forward yet again, and so many students and tutors are saying it just, you know, it feels too soon. On a personal level, it feels too soon. So how do we manage that? And in terms of expectations of attendance, which is something that we're always driving forward, is this you know, that we need good attendance. What is good attendance going to look like when we go back, and how flexible can we be for individuals, and what's that going to do in terms of our policies and procedures? Do we need interim policies and procedures for attendance? If we move into a blended learning, or we're giving some students that are more able and more motivated to work independently time to do that, how does that then look in the attendance stats? So we've got all these questions just around attendance, but bearing in mind that there will be learners and staff that are extremely anxious when returning. So how do we deal with that?
I think a question that's coming up there is that in terms of, you know, we can put all the physical support in terms of laptops, you know, iPads, dongles, etc. It's the emotional, the human support that, of course, many learners have really needed, even when they've had that access. I think a comment also that's coming out there is that, you know, in the transition, those learners who are in year 11 have lost so much of what they would have experienced in year 11. We have to some extent, make the transition extra special, whether it be virtual tours. I know some of you have run virtual tours, etc., virtual open evenings, etc. But it's also about how we engage the parents, because remember, these are still young people whose parents will have they'll have their own anxieties as well about the transition.
Yes, and you know, this will have impacted on them in numerous ways as well. And what does that say for the tensions within the environment that students might be trying to work in at the moment? And then they're going to need that emotional support to kind of move away from that, where things have been particularly difficult.
Before you go on, Sally, are there any other concerns from the audience? Sally's obviously been talking to a lot of you in different forms and different forums, but are there any other additional sort of concerns that you as tutors have about, particularly about the current situation, and then obviously the return?
Thanks for asking, Beej.
Yeah, I think one of the concerns that some tutors have is that their colleague tutors, in terms of their own well-being and ability and resilience to cope with the changes. You know, because obviously the support you can provide to students is a function of how well your own staff are feeling and performing.
Yes, yes.
And the other question that Victoria's posed, and I think is quite right, but it's a funding question. I mean, essentially a lot of this is about funding, because if we know that there's going to be extra funding for the extra support that students are going to need, the extra funding for one-to-one tutorials, which of course in many cases has been cut back because of the shortness of resources. We need extra funding if learners need an extra year. We're not, I mean, to say that, you know, well, you just have to do 3 years out of 2 years worth of funding is not a good answer. But I think the other major concern here is that if we're going to need a significant support package for staff to be, as you said, upskilled, to be trained for this new normal. And in there, the way that the funding formula works, it's going to have to start recognising that hours of attendance should not be the key determinant of a person's funding. I mean, for example, for adults, there is in the adult education budget guidance now, it says that this is the funding for a learner irrespective of the way that they learn, i.e., if they had a blended approach, it's still the same level of funding. Whereas, of course, if we say to 16 to 19, your study program is, you know, 600 hours, we're assuming normally 600 hours of face-to-face contact rather than planned hours of activity. So I think there has to be a clarification about what we mean by blended learning and how we're going to measure the hours. Because as you said, Sally, I don't think attendance just simply face-to-face should be the only measure of learning.
Absolutely not. I mean, if we should be measuring engagement as opposed to attendance, I think would be more useful. Okay. Shall I move on, Beej? Are we okay now?
Yeah, thank you.
So these are the kinds of questions that tutors are asking at the moment. Issues that are being raised as they're continuing to support learners. I think it'd be really interesting if there's any of these that the participants are currently addressing. I've got some ideas of preparing for the new academic year that we've drawn from previous conversations. But if anybody's got any comments on what they're doing, or you know, sort of what the colleges, training organisations, policies developing, you know, what kind of arrangements are they making for any of these?
I think Claire's already raised one of the issues about with new students who might not be familiar with blended learning. How do we prepare them, and how do we take account of the fact that they might have different styles of learning and different degrees of motivation? Again, I always draw reference to the fact that those providers that had introduced a greater proportion of blended learning often did it as a gradual process. So for example, entry and level 1 learners would have very little of it. Level 3 learners, who have to be prepared possibly for HE, had a higher proportion of it, but they were always trained. Remember the old wider key skill, Sally, improving your own learning? Well, that's what we have to do. We have to improve people's learning, and that includes how to learn effectively online, particularly if they find that demotivating or not as attractive. So good intervention there, thank you. Any more points there in relation to the questions that tutors are asking?
Okay, so we've talked about the attendance, haven't we? They're looking at staggered induction. Is that going to be possible? And this thing about information from schools, how are we going to get that information? Because, you know, everybody's been on lockdown to a greater or lesser degree. So where is this information coming from? How well prepared can we be if we haven't got that information coming through? We've had a lot of talk about blended learning and whether that's possible. And when we think about blended learning, I also think that we tend to look at it as kind of groups and classes, but maybe we should be looking at it as individual learners. So there may be different routes of learning for individual learners rather than groups as a whole. Complex, I know, but you know, we've talked for decades about personalized learning. Maybe this is another opportunity to look at that and see what is possible now that our use of technology is improving.
I think one of the questions that a couple of people have asked that we can add to that list, questions tutors are asking, is how much extra resource will be given us to do all of this?
Yeah. Wouldn't
thank
we
you,
like
thank
to
you.
know? Yes, thank you. If we hear anything, we will let you know on that. So
I think another point, Sally, just as you're moving on, an interesting thought here from one of our colleagues is that when you're starting to look at are we assuming that we will be able to go back to what was the norm before March, even in September?
I don't think we are. I think we're just waiting to see how this unfolds. And you know, all the plans that people are talking about at the moment, they're still looking at doing things on the basis that there will be social distancing, for example. I don't think anybody's pretending this thing's going to have gone away in September. And I think that's part of the anxiety, and it's why we've still got all the questions that we have, because we're planning for unknowns.
Yeah, well, one of the questions that has been posed is, how many of us listening in today are intending to put on summer programs to facilitate transition and also to help some of the learners that have been most disadvantaged?
A good question. If we can get some chat responses, that would be great.
Anyone planning to put on summer programs, extending the programs beyond the middle of July? Anyone thinking about early starts? Yeah, thank you very much, Julianne Halliwell. That's a fair point. Of course, with our vulnerable and learners that need safeguarding, the chances are that there will be an increase in activity, and in fact, just a continuation of activity. I know that we are not closing for those learners over the summer period.
Okay. Thank you.
Aaron's saying that we're doing a transition aspiration program for year 11, looked after young people and other vulnerable groups, and this will be mostly through mentoring. Good. So again,
right. Yeah.
Gordon, they're running the Head Start program at Selby. So these are good examples of providers. Deborah, summer projects, but no plans for face-to-face. So these will be projects set for people over the summer period, but not necessarily face-to-face. Although again, that can be supported virtually on a one-to-one basis as well.
Yeah. I mean, coming back to Aaron's point about the mentoring, I think that's a really good idea. We know that mentoring works well, but you know, there is the caveat that we need people with good skills for mentoring, as we do for tutoring. So it's a case of making sure that people understand what that role is, what the boundaries of that role are, what the skills are that they need to be able to engage in that successfully, because you know, bad tutoring and bad mentoring can be quite damaging. So it comes with that caveat, but great idea.
And I think Emily's come an additional point about with the level, some of the learners, they'll finish the qualifications, they're extending it for 2 weeks. So there's a website also being set up for new students, and of course they're going to conduct transition meetings with students with education and healthcare plans. Does anyone have a criteria list they can share that identifies which learners should receive IT equipment? That's a good point, Lynn.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, traditionally, you would apply the same principles that would be applied for the hardship fund for young people and adults, but you can do, obviously, I suppose that one of the issues here is that where it's absolutely essential that normally the rule is that you're funded through the normal funding formula for anything, any kit or any equipment that's absolutely essential for the completion of that qualification. However, I would think these are exceptional circumstances, and that's why we've been able to use our discretion. Again, that criteria list could be identifying a need, a degree of means testing or whatever that can be applied. It's going to be individual.
Okay. I'll just the next 2 slides just share some of the things that people are planning. So hopefully there's some good ideas for people to take away that might be useful. So we've got virtual online tours, virtual visits, tasters and induction if social distancing continues, sending out starter packs. I think this idea of contacting and keeping in touch with students over the summer is essential.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, in the past we've always tried to keep new learners warm, haven't we, by contacting them, you know, making sure that through the summer we say we're looking forward to seeing them, we're telling them bits about the college. And I think we should be doing this with all students in keeping in touch and making sure that they're feeling safe, looked after, and there for them if they need it through that period. Interactive packs, really nice idea. Longer inductions so that people have got time to adjust, I think is a super idea as well. Then we've got this thing about looking at the skills, and we've got predicted grades, but what, you know, how would those grades look now after the circumstances that we've been through? Would they be the same? Are students ready to move on? Or again, is it this thing about, you know, needing to revisit what they should have been doing this year to make sure that that's been thorough and rigorous enough for them to be prepared for their next stage? And planning to start the academic year with practical sessions to ease students in is a really nice idea where that's possible. And then moving on. We've got revisiting study skills. You know, it's that thing about we need to understand how to learn, and things have been very strange. We've worked differently. We can learn from that. We can talk about that and how students have adapted. But I think revisiting those study skills and establishing these new classroom behaviours in line with whatever our situation is at the time is going to be essential. Exploring increases to counselling provision. A lot of colleges are doing this. They're picking up on the significant amount of student anxiety and how we can manage that through things like dedicated student telephone helplines, and more counselling, online counselling. And again, as Aaron mentioned earlier on with the mentoring, that's a really good interim. So if we can offer mentoring for students to be able to just talk, and then that referral on where counselling might be required, because sometimes it is just that listening ear that students need. And I suppose also within that is where are these facilities for staff as well that might be finding it difficult coming back into this environment and managing students' anxieties as well as their own, and managing the fact that they may not have all the answers. And how do you cope with that? Because we like to help, you know, we like to have the information to hand, and we're going to have to accept that we won't have all the answers. So how do we deal with that and come to terms with that? Looking at more timetabled space for pastoral support sessions. A very small number of colleges are looking at doing this, but what's also concerning is there is the reverse, where they're looking at taking these sessions away to be able to almost force feed the academic and vocational side and get students through their course. And I think, you know, we need to acknowledge that that is not going to be the majority of students' priorities. It will for some, but for a lot of students, that pastoral support is going to be paramount to getting them back into a frame of mind for learning again. Some organisations are trying to predict the questions and concerns that students have, and try to get together a unified approach, and so that everybody's getting the same kind of message. That's a really positive way. And if people are doing that and they're prepared to share those questions and responses, then I think together as a whole we could have a really good resource there that everybody can share. So maybe that's something that people might want to come back with. And then preparing colleagues with strategies to create confident and positive environment when they feel anxious, which I think we've talked a little about already.
Sally, Lynn asked an additional question. An answer to Lynn's question from Nicola about what criteria for, you know, the learners that would receive IT equipment, that in her organisation we offered equipment to students in receipt of a bursary, looked after children, restarters, widening participation students. So they had some criteria there. So again, we'll share that with everyone.
Thank you,
but I think Lynn also asked a very good question, relates to what Gordon talked about, was do we have do we have an effective programme of development for staff to develop their own remote and online learning skills? So I think that's, I think that's going to be a significant checklist that we need to say, well, these are the things that we've got gaps in, and how do we improve our online teaching? I think I can draw reference. Sally, do you remember a programme that was run at Sheffield College maybe 10, 12 years ago called Lettol, Lettol?
Not bringing it to mind, Beej. Tell us about it.
I think the current chair of Sheffield College, Seb Schmuller, was behind a national project that was about developing the skills of online teaching and learning. So for Lynn's sake, what we'll do is Marek and I will research where Let All went and what sort of availability of materials there are there, which that might be helpful. Yeah, good. And then we've got another message from Rebecca in terms of preparing the students for next year. In preparation for next year and for the students we are most concerned about who are not continuing next year nor transferring to another college, what are your thoughts on what their support should look like over some months, over summer? Mindful that eventually it will have to end. You know, so it's those learners that are not staying with us. What are we doing to help them in transition?
Yeah, and I think it's right to say that, you know, we have some commitment to make sure that they have a safe and positive exit to their learning. So, you know, we would have to judge it on an individual basis. I appreciate that it's an addition to the resources that we already are spending, but I think it's really important to make sure that they are prepared for the next steps, and it may take some longer than others. So it's another one to go back to senior management with, to say how are we managing this exit strategy, because normally it's just built into their learner journey. So are we just extending that? It's a really good question.
Yeah. And Gordon's just adding there that not only should it be the responsibility of the senior leadership of your organisation, it's important that your governors or your board of directors, if you're a training company, are also engaged in planning this and making the resources available. Lynn's come back with it. You know, we only have to ask one question. We get so many answers. Open University 8-week course called Take Your Teaching Online. Thanks, Lynn. She's on week 3, and it assumes that you've got a Cert Ed, so it's not helpful for some tutors who might only have a level 3 qualification. However, that's something useful to maybe for other tutors to be aware of. It's an Open University 8-week course called Take Your Teaching Online. Thanks very much from Lynn for that. That's a really helpful suggestion. Thank you. And it's free. That's even better.
Fantastic. I mean, this thing about skills development for teachers and tutors, I think is a big question anyway, because we are learning to work in a different way, and to some extent it might continue for some time. And one of our colleagues was saying earlier about the responsibility of all staff to provide pastoral care. But again, it's, do they have the skills? Do they understand that role? And how do we ensure that everybody has that basic understanding? So there are conversations, I think, to be had around that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally.
So moving on, can I hand
over to me? Yeah, I think this raises a big issue all the way through. We've talked about the nature of the problems faced by the learners, whether they be classroom-based or apprentices, the issues that's faced by the tutors in terms of teaching and learning, as well as the pastoral side of it, and the different problems that we're going to have on re-entry when those learners come back in, or in some cases not at all. What's the government actually promised to do? Well, in addition to all of the other forms of support that's really tried to keep businesses as usual, it did announce a 1 billion COVID catch-up plan to tackle the impact of lost teaching time. You're all aware of this. 650 million is going to be shared across the primary and secondary schools in the academic year, mostly for small group tuition. That money will be available from the beginning of the new academic year, but they can start planning for it. And then there's 350 million pounds for a national tutoring programme to increase access to high quality tuition for the most disadvantaged young people, again, over the next academic year. Now, we all got excited because initially when this was announced, it was going to be available for 16 to 19-year-olds as well as early years. Since then, it's been clarified it isn't. And now the government is facing, in the words of the FE Week, is facing fierce criticism for snubbing colleges from its $1 billion COVID-19 catch-up package, which seemed to include us initially, but not now. And one of the issues I think this raises is that if there's an understanding that all young people's education has been affected, but young people must extend certainly to the 16, 17 and 18, 19-year-olds, but also what about all the adults that have had their education and their learning disrupted, is that this seems such a narrow focus. It's focusing on the right things in terms of small group tuition, one-to-one tuition, the pastoral side, making sure that people have got access to that type of support, whether it be coaching, mentoring, whatever that's needed, is all critical, but it has not included very many, if not the majority of the learners that we deal with. And I think that's something which is really frustrating, Sally. So I think it's important that through the AOC, the AELP and FETIN as well, that we lobby, and we have lobbied obviously our local MPs, etc., to make sure that this is still on the agenda and some consideration is given to it. Thank you, Sally.
Thanks very much. I think we're kind of at the. I'm really interested in this national tutoring program, though. How is it the Education Endowment Fund that's running that? I'm not sure how that.
The answer is that more guidance and detail will be provided soon.
Okay, so we need. Yeah, I'll definitely keep my eye on that and let people know as that develops. Then thanks, Beej. Okay, I think we're kind of almost at the end. Just to say that as these conversations have been going on, it's been really clear that we need to understand better what our students are going through, and our tutors, to be fair. But I've created an FETN student survey around COVID-19, what their experience has been, how it's impacted on them, their learning, their well-being, and what their anxieties are, if they have any, of course, on their return. So if anybody's willing to send that out to their students, I'll be sending a link out sometime this week to participating organisations for them to share with their students. So if you would like to participate in that, I have put a question in for their college or training organisation. So hopefully I'll be able to filter those results to be able to give to various organisations their responses. So if you'd like to take part in that, then maybe just put your email address in the chat, and then we can get that out to you.
Is that okay then? Thank you. I mean, it would be useful if as many people as possible who are participating today or who registered for today, even if not being able to listen, if could be involved in that, would really help to get some good quality data together. Thank you very much for that, Sally.
Yeah, I will also be sending one out for tutors as well. I'm currently working on that one at the moment, if people would like to participate.
So we've had quite a lot of people saying yes, please. The other way to do it, I suppose we could assume everyone who's listening in wants to be involved. Under obviously the data protection, we have to be careful.
Yes, of course,
yeah, we have to. So it would be better if you all did indicate whether you would be willing to accept it, and then it's easier for us to use those email addresses. So if you're willing to be involved in the FETN student survey, and then there'll be a follow-up with the tutor one as well. Could you just confirm by just doing that in the chat facility? Thank you. And we only need one person from each organisation. Thank you as well. Thank you. Because I know we've got several. Okay, Sally, before we leave, and it's been really useful, thank you for that. Have we got any other questions or comments that we haven't covered in the course of the last 55 minutes or so? We've had lots and lots of questions, so really we appreciate that. Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you. And I think it's really helped. Thank you very much. We've had a lot of comments saying thank you very much for the hints and tips and things we should be thinking about. As one person says, though, when's the money coming to make all this happen? Well, I think you're right. Yes. So yeah, we've got quite a lot of people coming in with saying yes, they would be like to be involved in the surveys. Any other questions or comments? Anything you want to add, Sally?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm always very happy to hear from people. So, you know, if there's anything that they want to talk about, particularly around the tutoring skills. I'm not sure if everybody knows about the occupational standards for personal tutoring. That's very helpful if they're thinking about developing training for their own staff. Then they can get in touch with me, and I would send them a copy of that. If there's anything that I can do to help at all, just get in touch. I'm always around. You've got my email, or you can give me a call. So yeah, there to help.
Use those contact points, but obviously please do so. And if you've got any difficulties contacting Sally, just get in touch with us at eMemoir. Or just simply email us back on the links that you had for today's webinar. Well, that's great. Well, thanks very much then. I think we've exhausted all the questions, and certainly we thank you for all of those. And as we said, obviously watch this space, because Sally and ourselves will be discussing what we're going to be doing in future, and also looking forward to the conference, the national conference.
Oh yes, I think it's the 21st of November. We're hoping to be running it in person at Sheffield, fingers crossed if we're allowed to, and social distancing allows us. But we're also looking at doing some online streaming as well. So we'll keep you all posted.
That's Friday the 20th. Friday the 20th of November.
Yes, it will be. I'll not drag you there on a Saturday.
It's Friday the 20th. Okay, then that's great. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks again, Sally, for an excellent webinar. Really appreciate your contributions today and your insights and wisdom. And we will now let everyone go, and we'll close the recording down, Marek. Thank you.